Hello everyone. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and let's go.
Mark closed the new laptop, feeling the spasm in his neck reminding him of itself. He'd been in the office all day, drafting the contract and preparing for tomorrow's court hearing. The clock read 10:30 in the evening. The lights of the city shone outside the window, and the office tower where he worked was almost empty. Only on the upper floors were a few points of light still burning. He sighed and thought that it had been a long time since his life had been anything but a constant race for results. As he gathered his papers into his briefcase, Mark suddenly had a thought. When was the last time he had felt truly alive? Risk, excitement, adrenaline. It was all in the past, back in the days when he had just started his career and wasn't afraid to stumble. Stepping out of the elevator, he dialed Claire's number, but she didn't answer. Probably in the workshop again, he noted tiredly to himself, and threw a short message into Messenger. I'll be home soon. His wife appeared in his thoughts less and less often. Not in the sense that she had ceased to exist, it was just that their communication had fallen into a viscous routine. They talked about who would buy the milk, when his parents would arrive, and whose car to drive to his friend's house. She's the same woman I once wanted to drive halfway around the world with, he thought as he clicked the central locking button in the parking lot. Claire was the complete opposite of his reticence. Unpredictable, bright, in love with painting since she was a child. She could spend hours painting, dissolving into her own world of colors, shapes and lines. At first Mark had enjoyed it immensely. Her emotionality nourished him. He felt a surge of new energy when he watched her with burning eyes talking about her latest painting. But lately it was as if their paths had diverged. They lived in the same apartment, slept in the same bed, but they were not together. And the atmosphere increasingly resembled not a family, but a forced coexistence. When he drove up to the house and opened the door to the apartment, he saw that the light was on in the living room. Claire was sitting on the couch, her elbows resting on her knees, her long brown hair was pinned up, and her face was a strange mixture of concentration and determination. Determination. She smiled slightly at the sight of her husband, but it was more of a nervous smile. "You're late," she said, not taking her eyes off the magazine on the table. "Work got in the way. Wanted to talk to you, but you were busy?" She nodded and flicked an invisible speck of dust off the cover of the magazine. There were pictures of people in masks, something about a report on a scandalous costume party that had recently made headlines. Mark noticed a large headline, "Secrets of the Night's Balls. No one knows who's behind the mask." "I think we have a problem," Claire said suddenly. Mark felt a lump in his throat. "A problem?" He repeated, ready to hear anything from the need for repairs to a discussion about seeing a marriage counselor together. "Our marriage " she paused, as if gathering her courage. "It's become boring. And believe me, it pains me to say this. I feel like you and I have become strangers. Even when we're around each other, I don't feel like you're with me." He noticed her hand trembling slightly as she pulled a business card out of the magazine. There's a place I found out about. It's an upscale private club. They have regular themed parties where they give everyone masks, where there's a dress code, music, and " she exhaled heavily. "It's kind of a different world. People go there for the experience, the excitement. And you want to go there?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though his insides were clenching. He remembered all the risks, his colleagues, clients, judges, anyone from his field of work. Any compromising photo could go viral on social media and jeopardize his career. "Yes," she said firmly. "I think it'll shake us both up. It'll be a secret you and I share, something risky. Break away from the everyday, try something new. Maybe it'll bring back the fire." Mark rubbed the bridge of his nose. The idea seemed completely crazy to him, but he saw an unusual glint in Claire's eyes, a mixture of hope and challenge. He knew it was probably a bad idea, but to say no meant putting their relationship on hold forever. As if from somewhere in the back of his mind came a quiet voice. "You've been in control for a long time now. Maybe you should let the situation go. Otherwise you'll lose it altogether." "Okay," he said at last. "Just the two of us. No experiments. Just to see, right?" She smiled, but there was something terribly exciting about it. "I promise," she whispered. "No experiments." But there was already a feeling in the air that he was signing his own death warrant by agreeing. The next weekend, late in the evening, Mark and Claire drove up to the mysterious club. The business card with the address and password was in his wife's purse. The place was in a fashionable area of the city, The facade of the mansion was dimly lit. The only sign of life was a luxurious dark wood door, next to which stood a doorman in a long coat. Behind him, the neon word private flickered, no name or signage of any kind. "Are you here by invitation?" the doorman asked, giving them a stern look. Claire held out her business card and quietly said the password. The door opened and they stepped inside. Mark noticed the dimmed lights, which immediately created an air of mystery. The lobby was filled with barely audible lounge music. Red velvet curtains parted the space as if on purpose to give visitors privacy or to lose themselves from each other. A masked girl stood at the front desk. In fact, only her eyes were visible, emphasized with black eyeliner. She handed them two accessories, a black mask for Mark and a golden half mask for Claire, studded with tiny rhinestones. "Welcome. The dress code is strict today," she said. "And a reminder, no names. Emotions only." "No names," Mark repeated absently. He looked at his wife. She put on her mask and looked in the mirror. There was a spark in the depths of her eyes that made Mark uncomfortable. Two more visitors came through, both in elegant suits and masks of half-dark shades, something like dark green and burgundy. Behind them, silhouettes in evening gowns and tails disappeared into the depths of the hall. The atmosphere was so permeated with the expectation of something forbidden that Mark felt a rush of adrenaline for a moment. "Shall we go back?" he suggested quietly as they walked along the corridor. "No," Claire replied. She smiled and whispered, "You agreed to it. Look how unusual everything is here." Thick music enveloped the floor, soft sofas and couches twitched. Several couples and groups were already sitting at small tables. Everyone was wearing masks, some of them were hugging, some were dancing a little. The scent of expensive perfume was in the air, mixed with the notes of champagne and exciting uncertainty. At the entrance to the main hall stood a tall man in black, looking like a security guard. He only glanced down at Claire. He checked her mask and let her pass. Mark felt his pulse quicken for a moment, as if these people saw through them, realized that he was new here, that he was afraid of screwing up, afraid of opening himself up to something he hadn't grasped before. The room they entered was even more impressive. The floor was covered in soft carpet, and in the center was a stage with a dance floor illuminated by reddish lights. A group of masked men were moving to a track that sounded more like ethnic rhythm than electronic house. Around the bar counter stood those who preferred to just watch for now. Some smoked thin menthol cigarettes, others drank cocktails, clearly having already crossed the threshold of sobriety. Inside there was an atmosphere of sin and sensuality, of intertwined bodies and mysterious gazes. "Wow," Claire whispered. "It's like another world." She took Mark's hand and dragged him toward the bar. They ordered cocktails. Claire asked for something exotic with passion fruit. Mark took a more classic whiskey-based drink. He noticed strangers laughing nearby. They were all wearing masks. No one was presenting themselves, but it was as if flirtation, signs of attention and light touches were already flying between them. "You have no idea how exciting this is," Claire said loudly enough to be heard. Mark flinched. She'd never talked about something like this directly, in public. Her words pulsed through his head, rousing the blood. He looked around. On the dance floor, several women and men pressed against each other, some unbuttoning a partner's shirt, some sliding their fingers around another's waist. Their gazes were burning, and their faces remained hidden. Looking at all this, Mark caught himself feeling a little dizzy too, perhaps from the mixture of alcohol, music, and the almost palpable current of passion permeating the air. But at the same time he felt that he was losing his footing. To him, who was used to a clear routine, this world seemed alien and frightening. He looked at Claire. She was dancing to the music with her eyes closed. She looked like she was about to fly off the ground. "Why don't we just sit somewhere?" he suggested, catching her arm. She opened her eyes and smiled. "Sorry, I got carried away." They moved aside, finding a small couch against the wall. Mark felt a certain uneasiness, while Claire was glowing with an inner light. It was at that moment that the thought occurred to him for a moment, "She's not with me anymore, even though she's sitting next to me." The thought was so strong that he set the cocktail aside and squeezed her palm tighter, trying to return the contact. But she only averted her eyes and said she had to go away for a minute. "Okay, but not for long," he murmured, watching her disappear into the darkness of the hallway. 10 minutes had passed since Claire had said she was going to the ladies' room. Mark sat on the couch, stirring the melted ice in his glass. The music was increasing and decreasing, and a masked couple was already seated nearby. They were clearly absorbed in each other, not realizing that they were essentially sitting in the middle of the audience. Mark looked away, feeling uncomfortable. 15 minutes, and Claire still hadn't returned. He began to glance at his watch. Maybe she's gotten sick, he thought, and stood up, moving toward the hallway where the restrooms were. The lights flickered in the semi-darkness and Baroque mirrors hung on the walls. Several masked women came out of the doors, laughing loudly, but Claire wasn't among them. Mark's heart beat faster. He circled another area, but found no one there. The light in the corridor was even weaker, and some doors were closed, labeled only in Latin letters. Somewhere he heard muffled voices, laughter, the rustle of fabrics. Suddenly he noticed a female silhouette in a golden mask, very similar to Claire's, walking away behind a velvet curtain in the company of a tall man in a black suit and black mask. Mark quickened his step, trying to get a better look at her. The silhouette was indeed almost identical to his wife's, statuesque, slim hips, similar hair. But he couldn't be 100% sure. "Excuse me," he tossed to a guard standing nearby. "I need my wife." "She just..." The guard, a heavy-set man in an austere suit, stepped forward and pointed with his hand to a sign, "Access by invitation only." "This area is by invitation only," he said dryly. "May I ask what right you have to enter?" Mark felt the heat of rising panic. "My wife is in there," he wanted to say, but the words, "no names, just emotions," flashed through his mind. And what could he do? Make a scene here by calling out her first and last name? Draw the attention of a dozen people at once in this semi-dark place where everything is kept anonymous? "I just need to talk to the woman in the gold mask." "She..." He paused, realizing that this all sounded pathetic and ridiculous. "I can't let you in without an invitation," the guard repeated. There was a woman's laughter from behind the curtain, and then muffled sounds, as if someone had turned the music up louder. Or were they not exactly musical rhythms? Mark felt the hair stand up on the back of his neck. He heard a muffled moan, but whether it was real or just a play of imagination he couldn't tell. "Look, my wife went in there." Came out louder than he meant to. "There are no wives here," the guard dryly parried, looking at him with an impassive stare. Mark froze for a moment. The curtain closed, and he saw only a golden glow on the floor. The silhouette of the woman disappeared into the depths of the room. Some man walked past carrying glasses of champagne and threw them mockingly. "Relax, buddy," but Mark didn't care for the laughter. Anxiety ran rampant. After a few minutes of fruitless attempts to break through, he returned to the common room. He sat down in his old seat, but the embers seemed to burn beneath him. The clock said it had been an hour since Claire had left. He looked for her in the hall, looked in the smoking room, even dared to knock on the door of the ladies' room, but there was no answer. All around, people were increasingly lost in a drunken and sensual frenzy. Mark's heart clenched like an iron vice. What if it's not her? He wanted to reassure himself. How many women here have a golden mask? But his memory tucked away the details, the same head fit, the same shoulder line, and the man who led her easily by the arm. As if she had not resisted. Another hour passed in agonizing suspense. He ordered glasses of water one after another, because he couldn't drink alcohol. His head was already ready to explode from the many sinister pictures he was imagining. What if Claire really was infatuated with someone here? Or maybe she was forced to. But the guard acted as if everything had happened consensually for her. It was another half hour or so before Claire showed up. Mark, almost desperate, sat at the far end of the hall, trying to hide from the intrusive stares. Suddenly he noticed a golden mask flickering near the bar. Claire was walking slowly, swaying slightly, as if she were in a state of pleasant intoxication. Her hair was disheveled, though it was secured with a barrette. Her lips glistened, and there was an inexplicable joy mixed with excitement in her gaze. She seemed to be on an emotional high. Mark jumped to his feet and went to her. "Where have you been?" he asked, trying not to raise his voice, but his words were filled with fear and anger. Claire nodded her shoulder lazily. "Walking around. Is that a crime? I've been looking for you for almost 2 hours." He snapped. 2 hours, Claire. She raised an eyebrow, or so he thought, because half her face was still hidden by the mask. "Come on, Mark. You're acting like an old man who's forgotten how to rest. Don't you think you're too uptight?" He felt a wave of indignation wash over him. But he noticed that up close her skin was slightly damp, as if after a dance or something even more intimate. There was a slight blush on the back of her neck. "Come on, let's get out of here," he said, taking her elbow. She slipped out of his grip as if his touch was uncomfortable. "Okay," she said more softly, catching his look, which probably had real panic in it. "If that's what you need, let's go. I'm sick of it myself." But there was a falseness in her voice. It was as if when she said bored, she meant the exact opposite. Mark felt his heart sink into his heels. He wanted to ask, "What were you doing there?" but also realized he might not be ready to hear the answer. The drive home passed in sepulchral silence. Claire stared out the window, leaning back in the car seat. Mark cast occasional brief glances at her. Her fingers twitched slightly and her lips were open, as if after an ecstatic experience. He couldn't understand how she could act like everything was fine. "Do you want to talk?" he muttered when they got up to the apartment. "No," she cut him off and headed for the bathroom. He stayed in the hallway, listening to the sound of the water running. 1,000 thoughts swirled in his head. He tried to find a logical explanation for her behavior, but everything pointed to a simple truth. She disappeared to a party where there was uninhibited flirting and probably a lot more. She came back agitated, aloof, as if she wasn't even his wife, but a stranger he was seeing for the first time. Mark woke up to sunlight creeping in through the loose curtains. It was 9 in the morning, which was late for him. Normally, he got up at 7 to catch up on everything he had planned for the day. But last night they'd gone to bed closer to 2, and his mind was buzzing with the events of the party. He looked to the side of the bed where Claire slept. She was breathing measuredly, as if she were having sweet dreams. Mark propped himself up on an elbow and marveled that his heart was still thumping inside. The memories of the nightclub, the fleeting laughter, the velvet curtain where someone had hidden, and then the return of his wife, who was as if switched. Leaning over, he noticed her leg peeking out from under the blanket. The curve of her knee, her thighs, the slight olive hue of her skin. And there, just above the knee, he saw a dark purple spot, the outline of which struck him to the core. It looked like the imprint of lips. The outline of an upper and lower lip, as if someone had sunk a kiss into it until it was bruised. His heart hammered so hard he felt a throbbing in his temples. He gingerly reached out and ran his finger over the imprint. The skin was hot, the bruise fresh. "What are you doing?" Claire asked suddenly, covering her thighs with the blanket in a sudden movement. Her eyes opened wide, and something like guilt or fear flickered in them. Mark couldn't find the words. He felt a wave of rage wash over him, but outwardly it was as if he had lost the ability to scream. All emotion froze inside. "What is this?" he said, pointing to the edge of the blanket, where the unfortunate bruise lurked beneath it. She didn't answer. She just looked at him as if he were a stranger, then looked away. She got out of bed, pulled on a robe, and walked out of the bedroom without saying a word. In the silence, Mark realized that all his worst guesses had been confirmed. "It's the imprint of someone else's lips," his brain pounded. "Someone else's. Not mine." But he continued to sit up in bed like a stooped man. He tried to keep track of his thoughts, but they raced like maddened horses. Anger, resentment, a sense of betrayal mixed with a kind of morbid curiosity. Who was it? Where did it happen? And why isn't Claire making any effort to justify herself? After a while he went into the kitchen. Claire was making herself coffee without looking at him. He stood beside her and poured a strong espresso into a cup, but he felt he couldn't take a sip. His mouth was dry and his throat felt bitter. They stood in silence, each immersed in himself. And in that silence, rage screamed in his head. "All right," he said deftly. "I'll leave for the office. I've got things to do." She nodded, continuing to stare out the window. He didn't know what to say, so he just walked out. The silence that hung between them was more eloquent than any words. It was the point of an emotional explosion in the silence. A bruised lip confirmed the fact of physical intimacy with someone else. Mark returned to the office and plunged headlong into work, or rather tried to. But the thoughts of what had happened did not let go. He felt a cold resolve growing inside. He's a lawyer, he's used to gathering evidence. And if someone decides to cheat him, he should be able to get to the truth. The first thing he did was contact a trusted acquaintance who was a socialite and had connections in the security services. Without going into details, Mark explained that he needed the guest list of the club that night. The acquaintance was surprised at first, but promised to help. A couple days later he sent an encrypted file. That same evening, Mark received the document. After running his eyes over the list, he realized that it contained people from high society, businessmen, politicians, artists, show business stars. There were a lot of names, and naturally, they were partly hidden under pseudonyms or initials. But some surnames were quite recognizable. However, that was not all. He remembered seeing CCTV cameras in the club. And sometimes in places like this, they did keep footage, for their own safety, to resolve conflicts. He called his contact again. He shook his head, saying it would be harder to get the video. But Mark insisted, offering a serious sum of money. A week later, he received several files on a flash drive. They were without sound, but in good quality. Mark turned on the first file on his laptop at home when Claire wasn't around. It was footage from the common room where they sat, laughing, drinking cocktails. Then the camera switched to the hallway leading to the VIP area. And that's where Mark saw a figure in a golden mask. She was standing next to a tall man in a black suit, and then the second man, a little shorter, but with shoulders, approached them. Claire took off the mask, and the footage shows her face perfectly. She laughs, throws her head back. The men are standing next to her, one stroking her neck, the other whispering in her ear. And she looks happy, excited, not the least bit embarrassed. Mark's breath caught. He stopped the video, trying to pull himself together. But a searing pain pierced his heart. He realized it was only going to get worse from here, but he couldn't help but watch. He pressed play. On the screen, Claire is kissing first one man, then a second. One of them smiles, points toward the door. Claire eagerly agrees, seems to say yes, because she takes their hands, and all three walk away, out of the camera's view. Mark paused the video. In that silent scene, he saw the full horror of betrayal. His wife, the one he had lived with for years, the one he thought he loved the most, the one he was closest to, here in the club, in front of the camera, acting as if he, Mark, didn't exist. He pressed play again, but the recording was ending, they had gone out the door, and the video signal was no longer recording the continuation. That was enough. Even too much. He closed the laptop and sat for a long time, pressing his fingers to the bridge of his nose, as if trying to hold back an impending migraine. An emptiness formed inside, and in its place came a cold, almost clinical calculation. He's a lawyer, and now he has all the evidence. The next morning Mark got up earlier than usual. He got ready, dressed in his best suit, ironed his breastplate. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a stone-faced man with a faded look. Claire was still asleep. He threw on his jacket and walked quietly out of the bedroom. He had a long day of work ahead of him in court, but before that he had one important thing to do. In his office, he dialed the number of his colleague, a family lawyer. He answered. Mark dryly outlined the situation and asked him to prepare the divorce papers. No scandals, no unnecessary stories, but with a clear wording, irreconcilable differences. The lawyer was surprised, but didn't ask any questions. In the afternoon, when Mark was on his way back from the meeting, he received a call from the same colleague informing him that the documents were ready. He could sign them today. Mark did not hesitate and replied, "I will sign them and file them with the court tomorrow." On the way home, he pondered, should I tell her myself or just present it as fact? But remembering how Claire had been looking coldly through him lately, as if he were nothing, he chose the second option. Enough words, it was already clear. By evening, the papers were in a folder. When Claire entered the apartment, without looking at her, he handed her the folder, which contained the official divorce papers. She turned visibly pale, but didn't make a scene. She just asked, breaking down, "Mark, is this a joke?" "No. But, we said we wanted to shake up our marriage. We wanted to bring back the passion." "I've seen the video," he interrupted coldly. Two men, a hallway, a golden mask. She dropped her gaze, as if afraid of him. "You've got it all wrong. It was just a game, I wanted." "Shut up," he cut her off. "Now I know what you wanted. And I don't need it." He stood straight, level, as if in court. The callous gleam in his eyes said he had already passed judgment. Claire burst into tears, trying to play off some sort of remorse. But there was no more room for pity in his soul. The next day she received a subpoena from her lawyer. Mark wouldn't talk to her. He acted as if she didn't exist. Soon he published a column on a legal blog. Without naming names, he described the story of a private elite club, where adultery and the destruction of families lurked behind masks. The article resonated because many people guessed what kind of place he was talking about. Journalists got involved. Rumors began to appear that among the guests was a high-ranking politician, and it was at this party he was caught in a racy situation. The scandal began to heat up. People whose names surfaced rushed to justify themselves and claimed they had nothing to do with it. But a few details pointing to a specific time and club caused a stir. Anonymous sources confirmed that the organizers did indeed have camera footage, and that someone had already leaked some of it partially online. It all came crashing down on Clare like a snowball. Her friends looked away. The former art director of the gallery, where she was planning an exhibition, suddenly forgot about her talent. No one wanted to associate with a woman who was at the center of a scandal, tarnishing her reputation. 2 months passed. Mark hardly saw Clare anymore, although they still technically lived in the same apartment. She slept at a friend's house, sometimes came to pick up her things, avoiding direct contact. Scandalous discussions continued on the net. The yellow press savored the details of the mysterious night under the masks, anonymous interviews, false stories of eyewitnesses. Although Clare's name was never mentioned directly, people who knew her by sight were quick enough to connect the facts. She tried to justify herself, telling acquaintances that it was all just a game. But apparently it was too obscene a game to be believed. The gallery that had promised her an exhibition quietly cancelled the collaboration, citing changes in the schedule. Other art spaces preferred not to take any chances. When Mark received the court summons to finalize the divorce, he felt neither joy nor sadness, only relief that the nightmare would soon be over. On the day of the hearing, he arrived at the courthouse in advance. He made his way to the courtroom, where a couple of lawyers and a few people were already seated, waiting their turn. Clare had come too, but she kept her distance, accompanied by her own friend. Their gazes met for a moment. He saw pleading and bitterness in her eyes. But everything inside him was frozen. The procedure went quickly. The judge ran his eyes over the documents, made sure that the parties agreed to the divorce. He asked about the division of property, and Mark, without looking up, said they would settle it according to the prenuptial agreement. Clare nodded, too. And, as if to put the finishing touches on the matter, the judge announced that their marriage was dissolved as of this moment. On the way out of the courtroom, Clare tried to talk to Mark. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. Things got out of hand somehow. I didn't mean to ruin everything. I meant to. I don't know." He looked at her, and there was no hatred or forgiveness in his gaze, just emptiness. It didn't matter anymore. She bit her lip and shook her head. Then she walked quickly away, as if she were afraid of crying in front of everyone. Her friend followed, trying to comfort her. Left alone, Mark saw a reporter with a camera trying to take pictures outside the courthouse, probably trying to get a story about high-profile divorces. He wanted no part of it. With a quick step he walked past, adjusting the lapels of his jacket. Once outside, he breathed the air of freedom. He took off his wedding ring and put it in his pocket. He looked up at the sky. It was a clear day, but it seemed to him that everything was colored gray-brown. It felt like the aftermath of a hurricane when everything around him looked the same, but inside it wasn't. He moved on down the sidewalk, amidst the bustling stream of people, feeling strangely devastated. That's it, the masquerade is over, he thought with bitter irony. The brief experiment designed to shake up the marriage had come at too high a price. And now that it was ruined, he couldn't even be angry anymore. All that remained was the feeling that he had weathered the storm and come out alive, albeit broken. That same night he finally deleted her number, all the photos and correspondence they had shared. Among the last messages was the short, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she'd left him a week ago. He looked at the smartphone screen and calmly erased that message without replying. The friends he talked to were mostly supportive. But some asked him if what he'd done was too cruel. Mark shrugged. She chose emotion. "I chose consequences." That became his short, cold mantra. Soon the rumors died down, new scandals replaced old ones, and the town moved on to discussing other high-profile stories. But for Mark, the night under the masks remained not just a memory, but a painful lesson. Never play with what you're not ready to lose. And Clare, perhaps someday she'll find her way, but without him. Mark walks out of court, removes his ring, walks out into the crowd. The masquerade is over. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.